Back in 2003, I was 16 and living in Millbrook, a quiet little town in upstate New York where everybody knew everybody. The population was barely 3,000 people, and we were nestled right between the Adirondacks and the Hudson Valley. I loved skateboarding down Main Street, my mom's pumpkin pie that she'd make every October, and hanging out with my best friend Sarah at the old arcade downtown. What I didn't love was being bored out of my mind, which happened a lot in a town where the most exciting thing that ever happened was when someone's cow got loose and blocked traffic for an hour. But that all changed the Halloween when Sarah came up with an idea that would haunt me for the rest of my life. She wanted to explore the abandoned house at the end of Maple Street, the one everyone said was cursed. Sarah had been obsessed with that house for weeks leading up to Halloween. She'd bring it up almost every day after school, telling me about the research she'd been doing at the town library. Her older sister Monica had told her the whole story one night, and Sarah couldn't let it go. Back in the 90s, before the place was abandoned, kids used to dare each other to knock on the door and run. It was just harmless fun, the kind of thing bored teenagers did in small towns. But one Halloween night in 1996, 3 kids went inside on a dare and only 2 came back out. The third kid, a boy named Tommy Fisher, was never seen again. The police had searched that house for days, going through every room, every closet, every corner. They brought in dogs and everything. But they found nothing, not a single trace of Tommy. The family who lived there, the Brennans, cooperated fully with the investigation. Mr. Brennan worked at the post office and his wife had died a few years earlier from cancer. He seemed like a decent guy, everyone said. He volunteered at the fire department, helped organize the church bake sales, always waved hello when you passed him on the street. After the investigation went cold, Mr. Brennan moved away to Denver within 6 months. The house had been sitting empty ever since, slowly rotting away while the town tried to forget what happened there. Sarah was convinced there was something in that house, maybe not ghosts or anything supernatural, but something real that would explain what happened to Tommy. I thought she was crazy, honestly. I'd tell her that the police had already searched the place and found nothing. But Sarah had this determination in her eyes that I'd never seen before. She said if we went on Halloween night when everyone else was out at the town square for the costume contest and haunted hayride, nobody would notice us slipping away. Monica had tried to talk her out of it, but when she realized Sarah was going with or without help, she agreed to come along. Her boyfriend Tyler, who was 19 and worked at the auto shop, said he'd bring a good flashlight and a crowbar, just in case. The days leading up to Halloween felt endless. Sarah made us promise not to tell anyone, especially not our parents. We'd meet up after school and go over the plan again and again. Monica would drive us in her beat-up Honda Civic and park on Oak Street, 1 block over from Maple. We'd go in through the back door using an old key Sarah had found at a garage sale, though Tyler insisted we'd probably need the crowbar since the lock was likely rusted. We'd spend no more than 30 minutes inside, just enough time to look around, and then we'd leave before anyone noticed we were gone. I tried to act normal during those weeks, but it was hard. At school, I'd catch myself staring out the classroom window toward Maple Street, which you could just barely see from the second floor. The Brennan house sat at the dead end, separated from the other houses by at least 100 feet on either side. The yard was overgrown with dead weeds, and the windows were all boarded up with plywood that had turned gray from years of weather. Sarah would catch me staring and lean over to whisper that everything would be fine, that we were just going to look around and satisfy our curiosity. But I could hear something in her voice, a kind of nervous excitement that told me she was just as scared as I was. One afternoon at the grocery store, I ran into Tommy Fisher's mom in the cereal aisle. I'd seen her around town before, but we'd never spoken. She looked older than she probably was, with gray streaks in her hair and dark circles under her eyes. She gave me a small smile and moved past with her cart. I felt this wave of guilt wash over me, knowing what Sarah and I were planning to do. But I didn't say anything. I just grabbed my cereal and left. Halloween night arrived cold and foggy. The temperature had dropped to around 40 degrees by the time the sun set, and this thick mist had rolled in from the valley, covering everything in a damp gray blanket. I told my parents I was going trick-or-treating with Sarah and would be back by 10. They were watching some horror movie on TV and barely looked up when I said goodbye. I grabbed my heavy jacket, stuffed my flashlight and cell phone in the pockets, and headed out. Sarah was already waiting at the corner of Maple and Fifth when I got there, dressed in all black like we'd agreed. She looked pale in the streetlight, and I could see her breath making little clouds in the cold air. She asked if I was ready, and I told her I guessed so. A few minutes later, Monica pulled up with Tyler in the passenger seat. Nobody said much during the drive. Monica kept her eyes on the road while Tyler fiddled with the radio, trying to find a station that wasn't playing Monster Mash or Thriller. Monica parked on Oak Street like we'd planned, killing the engine and the lights. We sat there for a moment in silence, and I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. Tyler said, "Last chance to back out." Nobody moved. Then Sarah opened her door and stepped out into the fog. The rest of us followed. We walked quickly, staying close to the edge of the street where the shadows were darkest. The fog made it hard to see more than 20 feet ahead, which was actually good for us since it meant nobody could see us either. We could hear laughter and music drifting over from the town square a few blocks away, where the Halloween festival was in full swing. The Brennan house looked even creepier up close than it did from a distance. The front porch sagged in the middle like a broken smile, and dead leaves had piled up against the foundation, some of them 3 feet deep. The boarded-up windows made the place look blind, like it was waiting for something. Sarah led us around to the back door, pulling out the old key she'd found. Her hands were shaking. Tyler stepped forward and tried the key in the lock, but it wouldn't turn. The lock was completely rusted, just like he'd predicted. He pulled out the crowbar from his backpack and wedged it between the door and the frame. It took him a few minutes of grunting and prying, but finally, the lock gave way with a loud crack that made us all flinch. The door swung inward with a long, drawn-out creak that sounded like something out of a horror movie. The smell that came out was awful. It hit us like a wall, this thick odor of mold and rotting wood and something else I couldn't quite identify, something old and dead. Monica covered her nose with her sleeve and said, "Are we seriously doing this?" Sarah nodded and stepped inside without hesitation. Tyler went next, then me, and finally Monica, who looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. The inside of the house was frozen in time. Our flashlights revealed a living room with furniture still sitting exactly where it had been left 7 years ago. A couch, 2 armchairs, a coffee table with old magazines still stacked on top. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust that puffed up in little clouds when we walked. Family photos hung on the walls in crooked frames. There was Mr. Brennan and his wife at their wedding, both of them young and smiling. Another photo showed them standing in front of this very house on what must have been moving day. I noticed there were no pictures of children anywhere, which struck me as odd since most families filled their walls with photos of their kids. We moved through the house slowly, our footsteps creaking on the old floorboards. The kitchen still had dishes in the sink, now covered in a fuzzy layer of mold. The bedrooms upstairs were mostly empty except for a few cardboard boxes pushed against the walls. Tyler opened one and found old clothes and books, nothing interesting. Everything seemed weirdly normal, just old and abandoned. Sarah looked disappointed, like she'd been expecting something more obvious. We were about to head back downstairs when Tyler called out from the hallway. He'd found a door we'd almost missed, painted the same faded yellow color as the wall. It was near the kitchen, in a spot where the shadows were deepest. He pulled it open and we saw wooden stairs leading down into complete darkness. A basement. Sarah's face lit up. She said, "That's where we need to look. Basements are where people hide things." Monica argued that we'd already been inside for almost 20 minutes and should leave, that we'd seen enough. But Sarah was already heading down the stairs, her flashlight bouncing with each step. Tyler followed her, then me. Monica stayed at the top for a moment before finally coming down, muttering about how stupid this was. The stairs creaked under our weight, and I had this sudden fear that they'd collapse and trap us down there. But they held. The basement was smaller than I expected, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, with concrete walls that were damp and covered in patches of white mold. A single bare light bulb hung from the ceiling, the kind with a pull string. Tyler tried it, but nothing happened. The electricity had been shut off years ago. Our flashlights revealed old paint cans lined up against one wall, a wooden workbench with rusty tools scattered across it, garden equipment hanging from hooks. It all looked pretty normal for a basement. Then Sarah noticed something at the far end. Another door. This one was different from everything else we'd seen. It was newer, made of solid wood instead of the old pine everything else in the house was built from. And it had a heavy steel padlock on it, the kind you'd use on a storage unit. Tyler said, "Why would someone put a lock on a door inside their own basement?" None of us had an answer. The padlock looked out of place, too new compared to everything else down there. Sarah asked him to open it, and Tyler wedged the crowbar behind the lock's shackle. He had to really lean into it, putting his full weight on the crowbar, but after several hard pulls, the screws holding the lock ripped out of the wood and the whole thing clattered to the concrete floor. The sound echoed in the small space, making us all freeze. We listened for any sign that someone had heard us, but the only sound was our own breathing and the distant thump of music from the town festival. Tyler pulled the door open. It swung inward on well-oiled hinges that didn't make a sound. Behind that door was a small room, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, and the moment Tyler's flashlight illuminated what was inside, my blood went cold. The walls were covered in cork board, and pinned to them were dozens of photographs. Children, all of them young, maybe 8 to 12 years old. Some were school photos with those fake backgrounds, the kind every kid gets taken in elementary school. Others looked like they'd been taken from a distance, like someone had been watching these kids without them knowing. Candid shots of kids playing at parks, walking home from school, riding bikes. My stomach dropped and I felt like I might throw up. Sarah gasped and took a step back, bumping into me. Monica started backing toward the stairs, saying, "Oh my God," over and over. Tyler moved his flashlight slowly across the walls, and that's when we saw the newspaper clippings. They were pinned up between the photos, dozens of them, all yellowed with age. Articles about missing children from towns all over upstate New York and Vermont. Plattsburgh, Saratoga Springs, Albany, Glens Falls, Rutland, Burlington. The articles went back years. The oldest one I could see was from 1988, about a girl named Jennifer who disappeared from a playground in Glens Falls. Each article had a school photo of the missing child, and next to each article on the cork board was a corresponding photograph, the same child but taken secretly without them knowing, like someone had been following them, watching them. And there, in the center of one wall, was an article about Tommy Fisher. Missing since Halloween night, 1996. Millbrook, New York. Last seen entering the abandoned Brennan house on a dare. Below the article was a photograph of Tommy wearing a blue baseball cap, smiling at the camera. There was a metal filing cabinet in the corner of the room. Tyler walked over to it like he was in a trance and pulled open the top drawer. Inside were small items, each one sealed in a clear plastic bag with a label. A blue baseball cap, a pink hair ribbon, a pair of wire-frame glasses, a small red backpack, a stuffed animal rabbit, a bracelet. Each bag had a piece of masking tape with a name written in careful handwriting, along with a date. Tyler held up the bag with the blue baseball cap. The label said Thomas Fisher, October 31, 1996. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. Sarah had started crying, these quiet sobs that she was trying to hold back. Monica was already halfway up the stairs, yelling at us to get out right now, that we needed to leave and call the police. But I couldn't move. I just stood there staring at all those faces on the wall, all those missing children, and I realized we'd stumbled into something so much worse than a local ghost story or urban legend. Mr. Brennan wasn't just some sad old man whose house had bad luck. He was a monster. He'd been taking children for at least 15 years, maybe longer, and everyone in town had thought he was nice, helpful, normal. Tyler grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt and pulled me toward the stairs. We ran up and out of the basement, through the kitchen, and out the back door into the cold fog. Monica was already in the car with the engine running, revving it impatiently. We piled in and she floored it, tires squealing as we pulled away from Oak Street. Nobody spoke during the drive. Monica drove straight to the police station on Center Street, parking right in front with the car still running. She jumped out and ran inside, and about 30 seconds later she came back out with a deputy named Officer Hayes following her. He was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and a thick mustache. We all started talking at once, trying to explain what we'd found, our words tumbling over each other. Officer Hayes held up his hand and told us to slow down, to take a breath. Monica said, "There's a room in the Brennan house basement with photos of missing children. Evidence. You need to see it right now." Officer Hayes asked us if we were absolutely sure about what we'd seen, if this wasn't some Halloween prank gone wrong. All four of us said yes, we were sure, there was no doubt. His expression changed. He told us to wait right there and went back inside. Through the station windows, we could see him talking on the phone, his face serious. A minute later, two more officers came running out and jumped into their patrol cars. Within an hour, there were 6 police cars outside the Brennan house, their red and blue lights cutting through the fog. They'd called in investigators from the state police. We had to give statements separately, each of us sitting in different rooms at the station, describing exactly what we'd found and where. A detective named Morrison asked me the same questions 3 or 4 different ways, making sure our stories matched up. My parents showed up about halfway through, furious that I'd lied to them about where I was going. But their anger faded pretty quickly when they understood what we'd discovered. The investigation moved incredibly fast after that. By the next morning, the news was everywhere. Local TV stations set up outside the police station. Newspapers from Albany sent reporters. By the afternoon, CNN had a crew in town. The police held a press conference where the chief confirmed that the items we'd found in that room belonged to 17 different missing children from across New York and Vermont, going back to 1988. Tommy Fisher was one of them. They'd also found remains buried in the crawl space beneath the basement, though they wouldn't say how many or whose. Mr. Brennan was arrested at his apartment in Denver 2 days later. According to the news, he didn't resist or try to run. He didn't even seem surprised. During his interrogation, which was later released to the media, he confessed to everything. He said he'd been careful, always taking children from different towns, never establishing a pattern. He'd used his job at the post office to scout locations, traveling around upstate New York for work and identifying vulnerable children. Tommy Fisher had been his only mistake. Taking a child from his own town, where people knew him, had been too risky. The attention and investigation had forced him to abandon the house and start over in Denver. The town was in complete shock. People couldn't believe it. I remember watching adults on TV crying, saying they'd trusted him, their children had been around him. Parents realized their kids had been in potential danger for years without anyone knowing. The pastor at First Methodist gave a sermon about evil hiding in plain sight. Tommy Fisher's parents finally had closure, but you could see it didn't bring them any peace. His mom broke down during a news interview, saying she'd wished for 7 years that Tommy would come home, and now she knew he never would. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night, even now, 20 years later. If we hadn't gone into that house on Halloween, if Sarah hadn't been so determined to solve a local mystery, how much longer would Mr. Brennan have gotten away with it? He'd already started a new life in Denver. He was working at another post office out there. Who knows how many more children might have disappeared before someone finally caught him. We were called heroes by some people. The mayor gave us a commendation at a town council meeting. Tommy's parents came up to us afterward, both of them crying, and thanked us for giving them answers. Local newspapers did stories about us, but none of that made me feel better. None of it took away what I'd seen in that room. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photographs on the wall. All those faces. All those families who never got to say goodbye to their children. Sarah stopped talking to me after a few months. We'd see each other in the halls at school and she'd just look away. I think being around me reminded her too much of that night, of what we'd seen. We never talked about why we stopped being friends, but I understood. Some things you can't come back from. Monica and Tyler broke up around the same time. I heard Tyler moved to Buffalo and had trouble holding down jobs, that he started drinking too much. Monica went to therapy for years. Last I heard, she was living in Boston and working as a nurse. As for me, I still live in Millbrook. I'm 37 now, married with 2 kids of my own, a boy and a girl. I never let them out of my sight on Halloween. We go trick or treating together every year and I walk right beside them the entire time, watching everyone who comes near them. My wife thinks I'm overprotective, and maybe I am. But I know what kind of monsters can hide behind friendly faces and normal lives. I know that evil doesn't always look evil. Sometimes it looks like a nice older man who volunteers at the fire department and waves hello when you pass him on the street. Every October, when the leaves start to turn and the air gets that cold bite to it, I drive past where the Brennan house used to be. They tore it down about 3 years after everything happened and built a small park there. There's a memorial stone with the names of all 17 children carved into it, including Tommy Fisher. Sometimes I'll see Tommy's mom there, sitting on the bench in front of the stone. She's old now, walks with a cane. I always wave and she always waves back. People say we did a good thing that night, that we brought justice to those families and closure to the parents who'd spent years wondering what happened to their children. Maybe that's true, but I also know that we were just 4 stupid kids who went somewhere we shouldn't have gone and got lucky. Lucky that we found that room. Lucky that Mr. Brennan wasn't there that night. Lucky that we made it out alive. And I will never forget what we found in that basement, or the horror of realizing that evil had been living among us all along, hiding behind a normal face, going to work every day, existing right alongside us like it was nothing. That's the real horror story. Not ghosts or monsters from movies, just people. Just the terrible things that people are capable of when nobody's looking. I was working part-time at a Halloween store in late October, helping people pick out costumes and decorations. Business was crazy that week. Lines stretched to the back of the store every single day. One afternoon, this girl named Sarah came in looking for fake blood and skeleton props for a party. She was probably around my age, maybe 20 or 21. We started talking about horror movies while I rang up her stuff. She mentioned her friends were hosting a haunted corn maze event outside town and asked if I wanted to come. I thought she was pretty cute, so I got her number before she left. We texted back and forth for a few days, mostly talking about our favorite scary movies and what costumes we were planning to wear. I figured, why not go? I had nothing better to do that weekend anyway. Saturday night came around and I drove out to the location Sarah texted me. It was about 45 minutes outside the city, way out in farm country where the roads got narrow and dark. The corn maze was set up in a massive field next to an old barn that looked like it had been there since the 1950s. There were hay bales stacked everywhere, strobe lights flashing between the corn stalks, and people in costumes walking around scaring visitors who went through the maze. Sarah introduced me to her friends when I arrived, about 6 or 7 people standing around near the entrance. They seemed cool enough, laughing and joking with each other. I wore some simple zombie makeup and torn clothes I threw together, nothing fancy. We walked through the maze together as a group, laughing at the jump scares and fake chainsaws. Sarah stayed close to me the whole time, which I took as a good sign. She'd grab my arm whenever someone jumped out at us. After we finished the maze, everyone gathered around a bonfire near the barn. Someone brought beer in a cooler and we all sat around talking and joking about the scares. Sarah sat next to me on a hay bale, leaning against my shoulder. I felt like things were going really well. Her friends seemed to like me too, asking me questions about where I worked and what I was studying. For a while, everything felt perfect. The fire was warm, the night was clear, and I was sitting next to a girl I actually liked. About an hour into the bonfire, Sarah suddenly got quiet. She pulled out her phone and checked it, then her face went completely pale. She grabbed my arm tight and pulled me aside, away from the group. Her friends kept talking and didn't seem to notice. She told me her younger brother Danny just showed up. I didn't understand why that was a problem at first. I asked her if that was a bad thing. She explained that Danny had some serious anger issues and was extremely protective of her to the point where it wasn't normal. He didn't like her dating anyone and had gotten violent with her ex-boyfriend last year, actually put the guy in the hospital. Sarah said Danny wasn't supposed to know about this party, but somehow he found out she was here. She pointed across the field toward the parking area, and I saw 3 guys walking toward us from that direction. One of them was shouting Sarah's name loud enough that I could hear it over the bonfire. She looked terrified, like genuinely scared. She told me I needed to leave right now before Danny saw me with her. I didn't want to leave her there with someone who sounded dangerous, but she insisted it would be worse if I stayed. She said if Danny confronted me, it would turn into a huge fight and someone would definitely get hurt. She promised me she'd be okay because her friends knew how to handle Danny. I asked her one more time if she was sure and she nodded, practically pushing me toward the road. So I started walking toward the main highway, hoping to catch a bus or call a ride once I got cell service. I walked down the dirt road that led away from the party, still wearing my zombie costume with the torn shirt and fake blood on my face. It was cold and dark out there, with barely any streetlights and nothing but empty fields on both sides. About 10 minutes into my walk, my phone finally got a signal and it started ringing immediately. It was Sarah. She was crying on the other end. She told me Danny saw me leaving and he was pissed off about it. He started yelling at her, demanding to know who I was. He and his 2 friends got kicked out of the event after Danny started a fight with one of Sarah's friends who tried to calm him down. Now they were looking for me. She said they took Danny's truck and were driving around the area trying to find me on the road. My heart started pounding hard in my chest. I looked around but didn't see any headlights yet, just darkness in every direction. I started walking faster, almost jogging. The main highway was still at least 2 miles away according to the GPS on my phone. Every time I heard a car engine in the distance, I'd turn around expecting to see Danny's truck coming up behind me. My hands were shaking and I kept dropping my phone. I kept thinking about what Sarah said, how Danny had beaten up her last boyfriend badly enough to hospitalize him. I didn't want that to be me. I just wanted to get home safe. I checked my phone to call an Uber, but the app said no drivers were available in this area. I was completely alone on this dark country road with someone potentially hunting me down. I kept moving as fast as I could without actually running because I didn't want to tire myself out. Then I saw headlights coming up behind me and my stomach dropped. I thought it was Danny. But when the vehicle pulled up next to me and slowed down, it was an old pickup truck, dark blue or black, not the newer red one Sarah had described. The driver rolled down his window. He was a man in his 50s with a gray beard, wearing a flannel shirt and a baseball cap. He asked if I needed a ride somewhere. He said his name was Frank and he lived just down the road from here. He saw me walking alone in a Halloween costume and figured I might need help getting back to town. I was so relieved I could have cried. I told him I was trying to get back to the city and that I'd really appreciate a ride. Frank said no problem at all, hop in. I climbed into the passenger seat and thanked him about 5 times in a row. He seemed like a genuinely nice guy, asking me casual questions about the Halloween party and why I was out here alone in the middle of nowhere. I told him the whole truth about Sarah and her brother Danny looking for me. Frank nodded like he understood completely. He said young people always get themselves into drama like that. It was just part of being young. I laughed nervously and agreed with him. We drove for a few minutes down the main road, and I started to relax for the first time since Sarah called me. The heater was on, and I was finally warming up. Then Frank suddenly turned off the main road onto a narrow dirt path that led into the woods. I asked Frank why he turned off the road. He didn't answer right away. He just kept driving deeper into the woods, the truck bouncing over rocks and roots. Then he said he needed to stop at his place real quick to grab something before taking me into town. I felt uneasy but didn't want to seem rude after he was kind enough to pick me up. We drove deeper into the woods for another 5 minutes until we reached a small clearing with an old cabin sitting in the middle of it. Cabin looked ancient with peeling paint and a sagging roof. Frank stopped the truck and turned off the engine. Before I could say anything or ask what was going on, he reached under his seat and pulled out a hunting knife with a blade about 6 inches long. He pointed it directly at me and told me not to move a muscle. I froze completely. I couldn't believe this was actually happening to me. Frank told me to put my hands flat on the dashboard where he could see them. I did exactly what he said. My mind was racing, trying to figure out if I could open the door and run, but he was too close with that knife. He reached into the back seat with his free hand and grabbed a black cloth hood, the kind hunters use to cover deer heads. He told me to put it over my head right now. I asked him what he was doing, why he was doing this to me. He didn't answer my question. He just repeated the command, louder and angrier this time. His voice changed completely from the friendly tone he'd used before. I put the hood over my head with shaking hands. Everything went dark and I couldn't see anything. Frank grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise and pulled me out of the truck. He walked me toward the cabin, keeping the knife pressed against my back the whole time. I could feel the point through my shirt. Inside, he sat me down hard in a wooden chair that creaked under my weight. He tied my wrists behind me with rope that cut into my skin. Then he pulled the hood off my head. I blinked in the dim light and looked around. The cabin was old and filthy, with dusty furniture covered in cobwebs and a stone fireplace that hadn't been used in years. There were religious symbols on the walls, crosses and paintings of Jesus. Frank stood in front of me, still holding the knife in one hand. He said I was an evil spirit sent to corrupt innocent people in this area. He said God had told him personally to cleanse the area of demons like me. I tried to tell him I wasn't a demon, that I was just a regular person named Mike who worked at a Halloween store. But he wouldn't listen to anything I said. He just kept saying that demons always lie, and that's how you know they're demons. Frank left the cabin through a back door and I heard him talking to someone outside. He came back a few minutes later with a woman following him. She looked to be around his age, maybe in her early 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a bun. She was holding a large Bible with a worn leather cover. Frank told her I was the demon he'd been tracking for weeks. He said God had led him to me on that road. He said we needed to pray together to reveal my true demonic form to her. The woman looked at me nervously but nodded at Frank. They both started praying out loud, reading verses from the Bible about casting out evil spirits and demons. I kept trying to talk to them, begging them to listen to me, telling them my full name, where I was from, that I had a mother and father who would be looking for me. But they just prayed louder and louder to drown out my voice. Frank told me to shut my mouth because demons don't get to speak during holy rituals. This went on for what felt like an hour but was probably closer to 20 minutes. I was crying at this point, my voice completely hoarse from yelling and begging. My wrists hurt from the rope and my shoulders ached from being tied behind my back. Finally, Frank stopped praying and told the woman to look at me very carefully. He said the demon would be revealed now that they'd completed the prayer. The woman stepped closer to me and stared directly into my eyes. Her expression slowly changed from certainty to confusion. She told Frank she didn't see a demon at all. She said I just looked like a scared kid in a Halloween costume. Frank insisted she look harder, that demons are good at hiding, but she shook her head firmly. She said, "Frank, I think you made a mistake. This is just a boy." Frank's face went pale. He looked at me again, really looked at me this time, like he was seeing me for the first time since picking me up. He lowered the knife slowly. The woman put her hand on his shoulder gently and said we needed to let me go right now. Frank didn't say anything for a long moment. He just stared at the floor. Then he nodded slowly and said, "I made a mistake." Frank untied the rope around my wrists, but immediately told me I couldn't tell anyone about what happened here tonight. He said he was doing God's work hunting demons, and sometimes mistakes happen when you're fighting evil. He said if I went to the police and tried to report this, he'd deny everything and make it look like I was the one who attacked him and the woman. He said everyone in this county knew him and they'd believe him over some kid from the city. The woman handed me the black hood again and told me gently to put it back on. Her voice was much softer than Frank's. They walked me back to the truck and drove me somewhere. I couldn't tell where we were going with the hood on. We drove for maybe 15 or 20 minutes before the truck stopped. Frank told me to take the hood off. When I did, I saw we were at a gas station right off the main highway. I recognized the area. I was about 10 miles from the city. Before I got out of the truck, Frank leaned over and said that God would bless me in heaven if I kept quiet about this. I didn't say a single word to him. I just opened the door and got out as fast as I could. They drove away immediately. I stood there shaking in the parking lot of that gas station for a few minutes, just trying to process what had happened. Then I went inside and asked the clerk if I could use their phone. I called my roommate and asked him to come pick me up. I didn't explain anything over the phone, just gave him the address. When I got home around 3 in the morning, I couldn't sleep at all. I just sat on my couch thinking about everything that happened. Frank's face, the cabin, the knife, being tied to that chair. The next day, I called the police and filed a report. I told them absolutely everything that happened from the moment Frank picked me up to when he dropped me off. I gave them descriptions of Frank, the woman, the truck, and the cabin's location as best as I could remember. But the cops told me something I really didn't want to hear. They said without any witnesses or physical evidence like photos or the actual cabin location pinpointed on a map, it would be extremely hard to prove anything happened. Frank and the woman would just deny everything. They said even if they investigated and found the cabin, the best outcome would probably be a minor charge like reckless endangerment that might not even stick in court. One officer told me directly that I should move on with my life and be more careful about accepting rides from strangers in the future. I thought about pressing charges anyway just on principle, but then I started worrying about what Frank said. What if he really did make good on his threat? What if he told people I attacked him first? What if he had friends who would back up his story? My name could get dragged through the mud and I could end up looking like the bad guy. People might think I made the whole thing up. So after a few days of thinking it over, I decided to drop it completely. I told Sarah what happened when she called to check on me. She couldn't believe it. She felt terrible about the whole thing, saying if she hadn't invited me to that party, none of this would have happened. I told her it wasn't her fault at all. Sometimes I regret not pushing harder to get Frank arrested and charged with something. I think about that woman who helped convince him to let me go, and I wonder if she ever thinks about that night. And I think about whether Frank ever did that to someone else, someone who maybe wasn't as lucky as I was. That thought keeps me up some nights. I drove over to my sister Emily's house on the evening of October 31st to pick up my nieces for trick-or-treating. She was helping them get into their costumes when I arrived. I asked if she wanted to come along, but she shook her head and said she never goes out on Halloween night anymore. She said it with such a serious tone that I was surprised. Emily had always been the biggest Halloween fan in our family. I asked her what happened. She sat down, looked at me, and said there was a story I needed to hear. Emily told me that 5 years ago, when she was 23 years old, she was doing her nursing practicum at Willowbrook Psychiatric Hospital in rural Pennsylvania to complete her training program. The hospital was old, built back in the 1920s, sitting in the middle of a massive pine forest about 15 miles from the nearest town. Her job was not easy. She worked the night shift, from 8 in the evening until early morning, caring for patients in the high-security containment ward. This was where the most dangerous patients were kept, people with a history of violence or those at risk of harming themselves. She worked alongside 3 other nurses and 2 security guards. At first, everything seemed normal. Patients took their medication, they slept, or they sat quietly in their private rooms. The hallways were long with flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed constantly. Emily worked with Sarah, the head nurse who was 40 years old and had been at Willowbrook for 15 years. There was Mike, a security guard in his mid-30s, built like a linebacker and always calm under pressure. Then there was Jennifer, a newer nurse around 26 who had just started 3 months before Emily arrived. The regular patients included an elderly man with severe paranoid delusions who believed the government was watching him through the walls. There was a woman suffering from major depression who barely spoke and spent most of her time staring at nothing. A young man with schizophrenia who sometimes talked to people who were not there. But then in early October, a new patient arrived. Emily told me the new patient was a woman with no name. Her file just said Jane Doe. She had been found by police wandering along Interstate 76 at 3 in the morning, barefoot, wearing a torn white dress. She did not speak a single word or answer any questions. The neurologist found nothing physically wrong with her, but she appeared to be in severe psychological shock or possibly suffering from memory loss. She was brought to Willowbrook for observation and treatment. Jane Doe was placed in a private room at the end of the hallway, away from the other patients. Emily first met her on the first night shift after she arrived. She brought medication and water for Jane. When she opened the door, she saw Jane sitting on the bed, staring straight at the wall. Her long black hair covered half her face. Emily called her name, but Jane did not respond. She set the water cup and pills on the bedside table and turned to leave. But before she closed the door, she heard a soft voice. Jane said, "I need fabric and thread." Emily turned back and asked what she wanted to make. Jane repeated, "I need fabric and thread. I want to sew something." Emily was surprised because this was the first time Jane had spoken. She reported the request to Sarah. Sarah thought about it and said, "Why not? Art therapy might help her." The next day, Sarah brought Jane a bag of fabric scraps, a round-headed plastic sewing needle that was not sharp, and a spool of thread. Emily watched through the small window in the door. Jane took the items without saying thank you and began working immediately. She sewed very quickly, with practiced movements as if she had done this thousands of times. Jane was thin, with pale skin and many small scars on her hands. Her voice when she spoke was raspy, as though it had not been used in a long time. Over the first few days, Jane did nothing but sew. She did not eat much, only drank water and slept only a few hours each night. But she never stopped sewing. Emily and the other nurses began to notice. They watched as a doll gradually took shape. First came the small body, then the arms and legs, then the head. Jane stuffed cotton into the doll using spare fabric. She embroidered a face onto the doll's head with black thread. 2 small eyes, a straight mouth, no smile or sad expression. Just a straight line for a mouth. However, strange things began happening around mid-October. The other patients became unsettled. The elderly man with paranoid delusions started screaming at night, saying someone was watching him through the walls. The depressed woman stopped eating completely. She just sat on her bed and cried. The young man with schizophrenia attacked security guard Mike, clawing at his face before being restrained. The doll was about 12 inches tall, made of beige fabric, with a face that had no expression. The nurses discussed Jane's behavior. Sarah thought it was a positive sign that she was engaging in an activity. Jennifer felt uncomfortable about it but could not explain why. The elderly man started banging his head against the wall repeatedly. The depressed woman scratched at her own arms until they bled. The young schizophrenic man talked constantly to invisible people, having full conversations with empty air. Emily began feeling tense. She had trouble sleeping after her shifts. Mike had to get 5 stitches in his cheek from where the patient had scratched him. Sarah told Emily, "Something is not right here, but I do not know what it is." During the last week of October, things got much worse. Patients stopped sleeping at night. They stood in their rooms staring at their doors, or they paced back and forth without stopping. Some began saying strange things. The depressed woman said, "She is calling us. She wants us to come." The young schizophrenic man said, "The doll knows my name." It knows everything about me. Sarah decided to hold a meeting with the head psychiatrist, Dr. Carlson. They discussed increasing medication dosages for the patients or isolating some in padded rooms. But Dr. Carlson said they needed to find the root cause first. He decided to interview Jane Doe. Emily was asked to accompany him. They entered Jane's room on the afternoon of October 29th. Jane sat on her bed holding the doll in her lap. The doll was complete now. It had a face, arms, and legs and small clothes made from fabric. Dr. Carlson asked Jane about the doll. He asked why she made it. Jane looked at him, and for the first time Emily saw her look directly into someone's eyes. She said, "This is not a doll. This is a gate." Dr. Carlson asked, "A gate to where?" Jane smiled a cold smile and said, "A gate for something to come back." The meeting had taken place in a small conference room, and everyone was tense. Sarah suggested isolating Jane, but Dr. Carlson refused because there was no evidence she had caused any harm. The interview took place with Dr. Carlson sitting across from Jane, while Emily stood near the door. Jane's voice when she spoke about the doll was calm but very cold, completely devoid of emotion. Emily felt a chill run down her spine when she heard Jane speak those words. After the interview, Dr. Carlson ordered Jane to be kept in her room with no contact with other patients. He told Emily that Jane might be suffering from religious delusions, but Emily was not so sure. On the night of October 31st, Emily worked her shift as usual. She arrived at the hospital at 7:30 in the evening. Everything seemed quieter than before. The patients had been given increased doses of sleeping medication. Sarah told Emily, "Tonight will be fine. We just need to monitor and make sure nobody causes trouble." But around 9 in the evening, things began to change. The elderly man started screaming. He pounded on his door and yelled, "Let me out. It is coming. It is coming." Jennifer went to check on him, but when she opened the door, he shoved her to the ground and ran into the hallway. Mike ran after him to catch him. But before Mike could catch up, the depressed woman also broke out of her room and ran out. She screamed wildly, no words, just screaming. The young schizophrenic man did the same. Within 5 minutes, all the patients in the ward had broken out of their rooms and were running into the hallway. They were not trying to escape. They just ran toward the end of the hallway, toward Jane's room. Emily and Sarah tried to restrain them, but there were too many. Mike called for backup from other wards, but it would take time for them to arrive. The night was cold, wind blew through the hospital windows, and they could hear an owl hooting outside. The scene was complete chaos. Patients running, screaming, staff trying to control them. Jennifer had a bloody nose from when the old man shoved her down. Mike used handcuffs to restrain some patients, but they were too strong. Sarah called Dr. Carlson, but he was at home, 30 minutes away by car. Emily looked at the patients' faces. Their eyes were rolled back, mouths wide open, expressions like they were being controlled by something else. The patients reached Jane's door and began pounding on it. They screamed, "Let her out. We need her. She is calling us." Jane's door was not locked from the inside, only from the outside, but the patients kept pounding and pounding. The sound was deafening, constant, like drums beating. Then suddenly the door opened, not from the outside. It opened from the inside. Jane stood at the door. She held the doll in her hands. The patients suddenly fell silent. They did not move, just stood still and stared at Jane. Emily felt the air in the hallway become heavy, hard to breathe. Jane stepped out of her room. She walked slowly through the crowd of patients. They made way for her. Jane walked to the middle of the hallway and stopped. She looked up at the ceiling, then down at the floor. She said in a louder voice than before, "They are ready. Now let it begin." Then she placed the doll on the floor. Emily did not know what would happen next, but she did not have to wait long. The patients began attacking each other. They did not attack the staff anymore. They attacked each other. The elderly man grabbed the depressed woman by the throat and squeezed. The young schizophrenic man punched another patient in the face. Blood started spraying everywhere. Emily and Sarah screamed, trying to stop them, but they could not. Mike ran into the middle and tried to pull the old man off the woman, but he would not let go. Jennifer called the police and ambulances. But meanwhile, the patients kept fighting. Jane stood still in the middle of the hallway, watching the scene with no expression on her face. Jane moved like a character in a horror film, slow and calm in the middle of chaos. Emily felt fear so intense her legs were shaking, but her nursing instincts forced her to act. The fighting was brutal. The depressed woman was being choked, her face turning blue. The schizophrenic man punched someone else, breaking their nose. Mike got scratched on his arms trying to pull patients apart. Sarah was crying, screaming, completely helpless. Then Jane walked through the chaos toward the emergency exit at the end of the hallway. Emily saw her but could not stop her because she was trying to help Mike separate the patients. Jane opened the door and walked outside. She took the doll with her. A few minutes later, police arrived. They restrained the patients with handcuffs and sedatives. 2 people were seriously injured, 4 had minor injuries. Nobody died, but blood covered the hallway floor. Police searched for Jane in the area around the hospital all that night and for many days after. They never found her. No trace, no footprints, nothing. Jane disappeared as if she had never existed. The doll disappeared too. An investigation took place. Dr. Carlson was fired for failing to control the situation. Sarah quit her job immediately after the incident because she could not handle it anymore. Jennifer transferred to another hospital. Mike continued working but never spoke about that night again. As for Emily, she decided to finish her training elsewhere and never return to Willowbrook. Emily told me that for months afterward she had nightmares. She would wake up seeing Jane's face, that cold smile, hearing those words. This is a gate for something to come back. She went to therapy. She talked to counselors. Eventually, the nightmares became less frequent. She finished her nursing degree and got a good job at a children's hospital where she worked with premature babies and felt like she was doing real good in the world. But she never celebrated Halloween again. She told me, "I know what I saw that night. I know Jane was not just a mentally ill woman. She was something else. Or she was connected to something else. And whatever that doll was, it was not just fabric and thread. It was something darker." Emily looked at me with serious eyes and said, "So no, I do not go out on Halloween night. I stay inside with my doors locked and my lights on, because I know that night is different. That night, gates can open, and I never want to see what comes through them again." I did not know what to say. I just nodded. I took my niece's trick or treating that night and we had a good time. They got lots of candy and we came home safe. But as I drove back in the dark, I kept thinking about Emily's story. I kept looking in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a woman with long black hair standing in the road behind me, holding a small doll. I made it home fine. I locked my doors. I turned on all my lights, and I decided that from now on I would take Halloween a little more seriously. Because some stories are not just stories. Some things that happen in the dark are real, and some gates once opened might never fully close.